My name is Martin Cavill, and I'm the elected mayor of Grandview, Missouri. Population 8,000, give or take. I serve on the Regional Emergency Coordination Board for Jackson County. I was a city planner for 14 years before that. I am telling you these things because before this week is over, you will hear people describe what happened in language that makes it sound like folklore, like a game, like something invented. I need you to understand that I'm not that kind of person. I am a man who approves drainage budgets and negotiates sidewalk easements. I deal in concrete, literally. On Thursday, March 6th at 7:16 in the morning, a plain white envelope was found taped to the front door of Grandview City Hall. No postmark, no return address. My assistant, Deborah, pulled it off the glass before I arrived at 7:40. She assumed it was a complaint about leaf pickup. Inside was a single playing card, a 2 of spades, and a sheet of white paper with 12 lines of printed text. Not handwritten, laser printed, clean margins. The text read, "Grandview has been selected. The game begins at noon Thursday. Every 4 hours, a task will be posted at a public location within city limits. The task must be completed by a resident before the next task appears. If a task is not completed, a consequence will follow. The consequence will be visible. The consequence will be permanent. There will be 7 tasks. The game ends when all 7 are completed, or all 7 consequences have been delivered. No law enforcement agency can complete a task on behalf of a resident. The rules are not negotiable. Good luck." Deborah showed it to me, and we both did the same thing. My name is Martin Cavill, and I'm the elected mayor of Grandview, Missouri. Population 8,000, give or take. I serve on the Regional Emergency Coordination Board for Jackson County. I was a city planner for 14 years before that. I am telling you these things because before this week is over, you will hear people describe what happened in language that makes it sound like folklore, like a game, like something invented. I need you to understand that I'm not that kind of person. I am a man who approves drainage budgets and negotiates sidewalk easements. I deal in concrete, literally. On Thursday, March 6th at 7:16 in the morning, a plain white envelope was found taped to the front door of Grandview City Hall. No postmark, no return address. My assistant, Deborah, pulled it off the glass before I arrived at 7:40. She assumed it was a complaint about leaf pickup. Inside was a single playing card, a 2 of spades, and a sheet of white paper with 12 lines of printed text. Not handwritten, laser printed, clean margins. The text read, "Grandview has been selected. The game begins at noon Thursday. Every 4 hours, a task will be posted at a public location within city limits. The task must be completed by a resident before the next task appears. If a task is not completed, a consequence will follow. The consequence will be visible. The consequence will be permanent. There will be 7 tasks. The game ends when all 7 are completed, or all 7 consequences have been delivered. No law enforcement agency can complete a task on behalf of a resident. The rules are not negotiable. Good luck." Deborah showed it to me, and we both did the same thing. We laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like a prank. The kind of thing a bored teenager with a printer and too much free time puts together. I told her to scan it and file it. I called the police chief, Gary Schumacher, and read it to him over the phone, while Gary said, "Sounds like someone watched too many movies." By noon, neither of us was laughing. At 12:01 p.m. on Thursday, a laminated card appeared on the bulletin board outside the Grandview Public Library. Nobody saw who placed it. The library has a security camera covering the entrance, and when Gary's officers pulled the footage, the card was simply there between frames. One frame, bare corkboard. Next frame, card. No hand, no figure, no shadow. The card was a 3 of spades. On the back, printed in the same clean font. Task 1. Place a fresh-cut sunflower in the southeast corner of Harry Truman Memorial Park before 4 p.m. My phone rang 12 minutes later. Gary's voice was different. "You should come see this," he said. I drove to the library. The card was already in an evidence bag. The footage was playing on a laptop in the branch manager's office. Gary played it for me 3 times. The card materialized between frames, not slid in from the edge, not dropped from above. In 1/30th of a second, it existed where it had not. "Camera glitch," I said. "2 cameras," Gary said. "Different angles, same result." We spent 20 minutes discussing what to do. The task itself was absurd. A sunflower. The nearest florist was a mile away. But the note from the morning said a consequence would follow if the task wasn't completed. And the word permanent sat in my stomach in a way I didn't enjoy. Gary wanted to ignore it. "We do not negotiate with anonymous threats," he said, and I agreed with him in principle. But I also called Deborah and asked her to buy a sunflower, just in case. Not to complete the task, just to have one available. A precaution. She found one at the Hy-Vee on Main. She bought it with her own money. I told her I'd reimburse her. At 2:15, with the sunflower sitting in a jar of water on Deborah's desk, Gary and I made our decision. We would not complete the task. We would not give a prankster, however technically sophisticated, the satisfaction of watching a city government jump through hoops. At 3:58 p.m., I was standing in my office looking south toward the park, and I watched the old elm tree in the southeast corner of the Harry Truman Memorial Park split from crown to root and fall across the walking path. No wind, no storm, 62 degrees and sunny. The tree was 140 years old. An arborist from Kansas City arrived Friday morning and examined the stump. He said the failure pattern was unlike anything in his experience. Not disease, not root rot, not wind shear. The wood had separated along its vertical grain as though every fiber decided simultaneously to let go of the fiber beside it. He used the phrase cooperative structural abandonment. He said it quietly and didn't write it in his report. No one was on the path when it fell. That detail kept me functional through the afternoon. But the path is a popular after-school route. At 3:58 on a warmer day, there could have been children under that canopy. I sat in my office with Gary and Deborah and 2 city council members, and we had the conversation that I suspect every official in every affected city had in those first hours. Is this real? Can we afford to assume it isn't? What do we lose by complying? The answer to the last question seemed like nothing. A sunflower in a park. The cost of compliance was trivial. The cost of refusal had been a tree, a living, irreplaceable, century-old tree destroyed in a way no one could explain. But Gary raised the point that mattered. If we complete Task 2, we're establishing that this works. We're proving that threats produce compliance. What happens when the tasks aren't sunflowers? He was right, and he was wrong. And both of those things would become clear over the next 5 days. At 4 p.m. Thursday, precisely 4 hours after the first task appeared, a second laminated card materialized on the same bulletin board. 4 of spades. The footage was the same. One frame empty, next frame card. Task 2. Before 8 p.m., a resident must sing America the Beautiful. All 4 verses standing in the intersection of Main and 3rd. This was different. This wasn't placing an object. This required a person to do something publicly, conspicuously, and mildly humiliating. Standing in a busy intersection, singing, blocking traffic, drawing stares. I understood then, and this understanding sharpened over the coming days, that the tasks were not random. They were designed. Each one required something slightly more difficult to give than the last. Not physically dangerous, not illegal, but incrementally more costly to the person performing them. The first task, effort. The second task, dignity. I did not know yet what the third through seventh would cost, but I could feel the slope. At 6:40 p.m., a woman named Ruth Becker, 61 years old, a retired postal carrier and church choir soprano, walked into the intersection of Main and 3rd, held up one hand to stop a pickup truck, and sang. Someone filmed it on their phone. Of course they did. By Friday morning, it had 400,000 views under the title, "Grandma Stops Traffic to Sing for Mystery Game." The comments were what you'd expect. Charming, quirky, small-town America. A few people called it a marketing stunt. Ruth told me later that she'd heard about the tree on the local Facebook group and decided she wasn't going to let another thing get destroyed because people were too proud to sing a song. She said she'd been singing in public since she was 9 years old, and the only difference was the traffic. She hit every verse. Her voice carried 3 blocks. When she finished, a few people on the sidewalk clapped. The pickup truck driver gave her a thumbs up. I thanked her in person. She said, "Honey, wait until they ask for something that actually costs something. Then come thank whoever does that." Ruth understood the architecture faster than I did. At 8 p.m. sharp, the consequence window closed. No consequence arrived. The task had been completed. The logic held. But I want to be clear about something that the national coverage later obscured. Grandview was not the only city. By Thursday evening, Gary's counterparts in 5 other departments had reached out through the regional law enforcement network. Each one had received an envelope that morning. Each one contained a playing card, different numbers, different suits, and an identical sheet of rules. The task specifics varied by city, but the structure was the same. 7 tasks, 4-hour windows, consequences for failure. Burlington, Vermont. Grandview, Missouri. Flagstaff, Arizona. Macon, Georgia. Duluth, Minnesota. Bend, Oregon. 6 cities. Population range from 8,000 to 84,000. No common political profile, no shared industry, no geographic pattern that any analyst could find. The only commonality was that all 6 were what you might call manageable. Small enough that a single public message could reach most residents, large enough that anonymity was possible. That was Thursday. By Monday, there would be 41 cities. By Wednesday, over 200. The third task appeared at midnight Friday on the library bulletin board. 5 of spades. Task 3. Before 4 a.m., a resident must walk the full perimeter of Meadowbrook Elementary School barefoot, carrying a lit candle that must not go out. March in Missouri. 38 degrees at midnight. The school perimeter is roughly a quarter mile. Barefoot on cold sidewalk and frozen grass, holding a candle you can't shield with your hand because the instructions didn't say you could. This was the step up. Not dangerous, not truly, but painful. Cold enough to hurt, long enough to matter. And timed for the dead hours when the cost of doing it was also loneliness. You'd be out there in the freezing dark, in pain, alone, completing a task whose purpose no one could name, for an authority no one could see. No one volunteered before 2 a.m. I sat in my office with the scanner on and watched the clock. Gary had a patrol car near the school. Not to complete the task, the rules excluded law enforcement, but to observe. At 2:40, A man walked out of the apartment complex across from the school, barefoot in shorts and a t-shirt, with a lit birthday candle in a coffee mug. His name was Devin Okafor, 26. Worked at the Amazon warehouse in South KC. He told the officer he couldn't sleep and figured somebody had to do it. The candle went out twice. He relit it with a Bic lighter, which technically wasn't prohibited by the instructions. He finished the perimeter at 3:22 a.m. and went home with mild frostbite on his left heel. No consequence arrived. Task 4 appeared at 4 a.m. 6 of spades. Task 4, before 8 a.m., a resident must stand in front of the Grandview police station and read aloud, from memory, the full name, address, and birthday of someone they love. Do you see it? Effort, dignity, pain, and now exposure, not of yourself, of someone else, someone you love. Their private information spoken aloud in a public place, on camera, in a situation that the entire internet was beginning to watch. The slope was real, and it was elegant, and it was cruel. I need to tell you what was happening in the other 5 cities, because it matters. Burlington had completed its first 3 tasks. Their version involved swimming across a section of Lake Champlain in March. And a teenage lifeguard did it but failed Task 4. And the consequence was the spontaneous collapse of a pedestrian bridge over the Winooski River. No injuries. But the bridge was 110 years old, and the structural failure was identical in character to our elm tree. Cooperative abandonment. Everything letting go at once. Flagstaff failed 2 tasks. They lost a bridge and a church bell tower. The bell fell through 3 floors and embedded itself in the basement slab. Again, no casualties. But the margin was narrowing. Macon failed 1 task. Their town clock, the one on the courthouse, the one that had been running since 1893, stopped. Not broke, stopped. Every gear intact, every spring wound, simply refusing to move. These consequences were escalating in parallel with the tasks. By Friday afternoon, the 6 cities had established a shared communication channel. Not through official federal channels, FEMA was monitoring, but had not classified the events, and the FBI's initial assessment was coordinated domestic terrorism with no identified perpetrator or ideology. The channel was a group text thread between 6 police chiefs and 6 mayors, plus a few council members and emergency managers. I want to describe what that thread felt like, because it shaped everything that came after. Imagine 12 strangers dropped into a conversation about an experience none of them can explain. Each one is dealing with a local crisis that looks manageable in isolation, but fits into a pattern that implies something far beyond management. Each one has a population looking to them for answers they don't have. And each one has, in the back of their mind, the growing suspicion that the tasks are going to keep getting harder and the consequences are going to keep getting worse. And at some point soon, the question won't be, should we play? But can we survive not playing? Karen Whitfield, the mayor of Burlington, said something Friday night that I've thought about every day since. She said, "It's not the tasks that scare me. It's that someone designed a system that makes decent people compete to sacrifice for strangers. That's not terrorism. That's a test." I asked her what she thought was being tested. She said, "Whether we'll do it to each other before they have to do it to us." I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. On Saturday, 4 new cities reported. By Saturday night, 11. By Sunday morning, 23. Same structure, white envelope, playing card, 12 lines. Tasks beginning at noon. Cards were always spades in the first wave of 6 cities. The new cities received hearts, then diamonds, then clubs. Someone on the thread, I think it was Gary, pointed out that a standard deck has 13 cards per suit. and we'd been receiving them in ascending order. 2 through 6 so far. That meant 7 more per city. That meant an endpoint. But it also meant the final card in each suit would be the ace, and none of us wanted to think about what an ace-level task or consequence might look like. The FBI established a task force on Saturday. Their first official statement used the phrase, "coordinated psychological operation of unknown origin," and recommended that affected cities neither comply with nor publicly acknowledge the demands. This was, to put it diplomatically, not helpful. The cities that had complied had lost nothing. The cities that had refused had lost infrastructure that would take years and millions of dollars to replace. The public conversation was splitting along a line I hadn't anticipated. Not compliance versus resistance. Something stranger. People were volunteering. Not reluctantly, not under pressure. Eagerly. On social media, in local Facebook groups, on Reddit threads that were multiplying by the hour, people were arguing for the right to be the one who completed the next task. In Grandview, 7 people contacted City Hall asking to be notified when Task 5 appeared so they could perform it. The game, and I use that word with full awareness of how it sounds, was becoming something people wanted to be part of. Ruth Becker had 400,000 views and a nickname, Singing Ruth. Devin Okafor had a GoFundMe for his frostbite that had raised $12,000 in 14 hours. The slope was not just in the tasks, it was in us. Task 5 appeared at 8 a.m. Saturday. 7 of spades. Task 5. Before noon, 2 residents who have never met must stand together in the Grandview City Hall parking lot and each tell the other the worst thing they have ever done. Both accounts must be true. Both must be spoken aloud. Both must be audible to at least one witness. I read the card twice, then I sat down. This was the pivot. Not effort, not dignity, not pain, not exposure of a loved one. Confession. Mutual confession between strangers, witnessed. The task required 2 people to find each other, agree to participate, and then stand in public and say the thing they'd spent their lives not saying. And someone had to hear it. I want to be precise about why this mattered. The previous tasks cost something, but they cost it from the individual. This task required trust. It required 2 strangers to make themselves equally vulnerable at the same time, in front of a third person who now carried their secrets. The structural requirement wasn't sacrifice. It was intimacy. 2 women arrived at City Hall at 9:15. They'd connected through a Facebook post 20 minutes earlier. One was a home health aide named Patricia. The other was a college student named Min. They'd never spoken before that morning. I was the witness. I didn't choose to be. I was in the parking lot walking to my car, and Patricia asked if I would stay. I won't repeat what they said. I made that decision in the moment, and I'm keeping it. What I will tell you is that both of them were crying by the end, and that they hugged each other, 2 strangers, in a parking lot on a cold Saturday morning, and that the hug lasted a long time, and that I had to look away because something about it felt too honest to observe. Task completed. No consequence. That afternoon, I called Karen Whitfield in Burlington. Their version of Task 5 had required 3 strangers to exchange letters containing their greatest fear, and then read each other's letters aloud at a public park. She told me that the 3 people who did it had exchanged phone numbers afterward and were planning to have dinner. "Martin," she said, "I'm starting to think the cruelty is a shell." Meaning what? Meaning the tasks are designed to look punitive, but the actual experience of completing them is something else. Effort, then vulnerability, then connection. That's not a punishment arc. That's a therapeutic one. I told her that didn't make the consequences less real. A bridge collapsed. A tree split. People could have died. Could have, she said, but didn't. Not once. Not in any city. The consequences destroy things, Martin. They haven't hurt a single person. Don't you think that's a choice? I didn't answer her then. I'm answering now. Yes, I think it was a choice. And I think the choice was the entire point. By Sunday morning, the thread had grown from 12 people to over 100. New cities were joining every few hours. The pattern was accelerating geographically, but remained structurally identical. Same envelope, same rules, same 4-hour windows, same escalating tasks that cost incrementally more human honesty, vulnerability, and mutual exposure. And the public was splitting, not into 2 camps, into 3. The first group, the largest, wanted to complete every task. They saw the consequences as preventable destruction and the tasks as a small price to pay. Many of them were motivated by civic pride or by the growing social media ecosystem that celebrated participants as local heroes. Singing Ruth was on Good Morning America. Devin Okafor was offered a shoe sponsorship, which he turned down. The second group refused to participate on principle. This group included most law enforcement officials, a significant portion of elected leaders, and a vocal contingent of citizens who correctly argued that complying with anonymous coercion was dangerous regardless of the individual cost. Gary Schumacher was in this camp. His reasoning was sound. Every completed task proved the system worked, and a system that worked would inevitably escalate beyond what anyone was willing to give. The third group was smaller and quieter and scared me the most. They wanted to fail. They wanted to see what happened. They wanted consequences not because they were destructive, but because the consequences were impossible, and they wanted to understand the mechanism. These were the people refreshing the arborist's report at 2 in the morning. The ones analyzing the bridge collapse frame by frame. The ones who had noticed correctly that the consequences violated known physics and who believed that the failures were more important than the tasks. This third group included, by Sunday afternoon, a materials engineer from MIT, a structural geologist from USGS, and a retired game theorist from RAND who had been posting anonymously on Reddit under a name I won't repeat because he later asked me not to. The game theorist sent me a direct message Sunday night. It said, "Mayor Cavill, I've modeled the task structure across all known cities. The progression is consistent with a mechanism design called a preference revelation game. Each task is calibrated to extract a slightly deeper form of honest human action. Effort, then social risk, then physical cost, then informational vulnerability, then relational trust. The final tasks, if the pattern holds, will require collective coordination, meaning the task will be impossible for a single person to complete. The game is designed to build a city's capacity for cooperative action under pressure. The consequences are enforcement, not punishment. They exist to make the cost of non-participation visible. Whatever this is, it's not random, it's not cruel, and it's not done." I read his message 4 times. Then I drove to City Hall because Task 6 was due at midnight. Task 6, 8 of spades, midnight Sunday. Task 6, before 4 a.m. Every business on Main Street must unlock its front door and leave it open until dawn. Not a person, a collective, every business. The card required coordinated action across dozens of independent owners, most of whom were asleep, many of whom would never agree to leave their livelihoods unlocked and unguarded on a Sunday night during what the national news was now calling its domestic terror campaign. The game theorist was right. The tasks had crossed from individual to collective. I started making calls at 12:10 a.m. Gary was against it. Vehemently. He said he could not, as police chief, encourage citizens to disable their own security. He said his officers could not protect 26 open storefronts simultaneously. He said this was the task designed to break us, and we should let it. Let the consequence come, he said. We'll document it. That data is more valuable than whatever's on Main Street. He wasn't wrong about the data. He was wrong about the cost. I called business owners. Some answered. Some didn't. Some agreed immediately, the ones who'd been following the story, the ones who'd watched Ruth sing, the ones who'd read about Patricia and Min. Others refused, understandably. A woman who owned the antique shop said, "Mr. Mayor, I have 40 years of inventory in there. You're asking me to open my doors based on a playing card and a magic trick." By 2 a.m., I had 14 of 26. Not enough. The card said every business. At 2:30, something happened that I did not orchestrate and did not expect. Residents began showing up on Main Street. Not business owners, neighbors. Regular people who'd heard what was happening through the Facebook group that had become Grandview's informal crisis channel. They brought lawn chairs and thermoses of coffee, and they sat on the sidewalk in front of the businesses that were open, and then in front of the ones that weren't. And they started knocking on doors. Not demanding, asking, saying, "I'll sit here until dawn. I'll watch your store. Nothing will be taken." By 3:15 a.m., 23 of 26 businesses were open. The 3 holdouts, a pawn shop, a vape store, and a nail salon, remained locked. Their owners were either unreachable or unwilling. At 3:50, 10 minutes before the deadline, the owner of the pawn shop drove up, looked at the crowd on the sidewalk, and unlocked his door without saying a word. The vape store owner called me at 3:54 and gave me the door code. His hands were shaking so badly on FaceTime that he couldn't type it himself. The nail salon stayed locked. 25 of 26. At 4 a.m., every window in the nail salon shattered inward. The nail salon was empty. No one was hurt. The glass fell inward, not outward, which a gas leak or pressure event would have produced. Inward, as though something outside had pressed gently on every pane at once, uniformly, and the glass had simply decided to stop being glass. The insurance adjuster who examined it Monday morning used a phrase I recognized. Cooperative material failure. He didn't know the arborist in Kansas City had used the same construction. He arrived at it independently. I stopped sleeping on Sunday night and did not sleep again until Wednesday. Here is what was happening nationally. By Monday morning, 41 cities were active in the game. The FBI task force had grown to 200 agents and had produced no actionable intelligence. No fingerprints on any envelope. No DNA. No surveillance footage showing a delivery or a placement. The laminated cards appeared between camera frames in every city, on every occasion, without exception. The material was standard laminate over standard card stock. The ink was standard laser toner. Every forensic path led nowhere. The consequences were consistent across all cities. Failed tasks produced destruction of property or infrastructure. The destroyed things were always old, always valued, always public. Never a chain store, never a new building. Always something a community would mourn. A 100-year-old oak, a wrought iron bandstand, a hand-laid cobblestone alley, a Depression-era mural. The losses were cultural, sentimental, irreplaceable. They hurt in a way that made you angry at whoever failed to complete the task, not at whoever designed the game. And that, I realized, was the most sophisticated element of the design. The game externalized the cost of refusal onto the community. And it did so in a way that made non-participants bear the blame. You didn't play. We lost our bandstand. You were too proud? The mural's gone. The pressure to comply wasn't coming from the game. It was coming from your neighbors. By Monday, 31 of the 41 active cities had completed every task. 10 had failed at least one. The failures clustered in cities where leadership had publicly refused to engage, places where the mayor or police chief had gone on television and said, "Testenador, we will not negotiate," and then watched their oldest, most beloved structures dissolve. 2 governors issued emergency declarations. The president made a statement Tuesday morning that I will paraphrase because the exact words have been reported elsewhere. The federal government was treating this as a national security matter. All affected cities should refuse compliance, and military assets were being positioned to support local law enforcement. None of that mattered. The military could not complete tasks. Law enforcement could not complete tasks. The rules were explicit, and the rules, as far as anyone could determine, were real. The only people who could play were residents. And residents were playing. Not because they were told to, not because they were coerced, because the alternative was watching something beautiful get destroyed while you stood behind a barricade and did nothing. This is the thing I need you to understand before I describe what happened in Grandview on Tuesday and Wednesday. The game was not forcing anyone to do anything. It was revealing what people would do when the stakes were visible. The cost of inaction was shared, and something was keeping score. Task 7 appeared at 4 a.m. Monday. 9 of spades. Task 7, before 8 a.m. A resident must go to the home of someone they have wronged and apologize. The apology must be specific. The wronged party must confirm that it is genuine. This was the task that broke the pattern of manageable compliance. Not because it was physically difficult, because it was emotionally impossible for most people. To complete it, you had to know who you'd wronged, admit what you'd done, say it to their face, and then the other person had to confirm to an outside observer in some verifiable way that the apology was real. How do you verify sincerity? What does genuine mean when someone's apologizing to prevent a building from collapsing? Is a coerced apology real? Is an apology motivated by fear of consequences real? The philosophy department at UMKC posted a 1,200-word analysis that went viral. The Reddit threads were vicious. Twitter was useless. In Grandview, a man named Carl Pruitt, 54, a mechanic, drove to his ex-wife's house at 5:30 a.m. and stood on her porch for 40 minutes before she opened the door. What he said to her is not my story to tell. She confirmed to a neighbor who had been designated as witness that the apology was genuine. The neighbor said both of them were standing on the porch afterward, not talking, just standing together, and that it was the quietest thing she'd ever seen. Task completed. No consequence. In Flagstaff, no one completed the task. The consequence was the destruction of a sandstone arch on the northern edge of town that had been a sacred site for the Yavapai people for centuries. The outcry was enormous. The governor of Arizona called it an act of war against indigenous heritage. The Yavapai Nation issued a statement that was more measured and more devastating. The arch stood for longer than any nation on this continent. It was not yours to protect, and it was not yours to lose. In Duluth, a woman completed the task by apologizing to her teenage son for something that the local paper later reported was related to his father's death. The son, 17, confirmed the apology was genuine by posting a single sentence on Instagram. She finally said it. I read that post on my phone while sitting in my car outside City Hall, and I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road. These tasks were not tests of obedience. They were tests of honesty. Of the specific kind of honesty that people spend their entire lives avoiding because the cost of speaking it is so high that silence feels like the rational choice. The game was making silence irrational. It was attaching a price to avoidance that was higher than the price of truth. I understood Karen Whitfield's theory now. The cruelty was a shell. The consequences were the stick. But the tasks, the actual experience of completing them, were building something in the cities that completed them. Connection, vulnerability, trust. And the cities that refused were losing something they couldn't rebuild. The game theorist, I'll call him Dr. S, which is not his initials, sent me his full model Monday night. I am not a mathematician, but I will describe what I understood. He had mapped every known task across all active cities onto a single progression axis. The axis measured what he called cooperative depth, the degree of mutual vulnerability and coordination required to complete each task. Early tasks were low. Individual effort, individual cost. Middle tasks were moderate. Personal exposure, witnessed honesty, relational repair. The later tasks, he predicted, would require citywide coordination under time pressure, with the final task requiring something no individual could accomplish alone. His model predicted that task 10 or 11, corresponding to the queen or king in the suit, would require every resident of the city to participate simultaneously. His exact words were, "The endgame is a collective action problem that can only be solved by a community that trusts itself completely. Every preceding task exists to build that trust incrementally." I asked him what the ace would require. He said, "I don't know. But the progression suggests it will require the thing that's hardest for a group to give, something they cannot take back and cannot control the consequences of." I asked him if he thought the game was good or evil. He paused for a long time. Then he said, "Mayor Cavill, I've spent 30 years modeling human decision-making, and I have never seen a mechanism this elegant. Whoever designed it understands cooperative behavior better than anyone alive. The question isn't whether it's good or evil. The question is whether a system that forces people to become better to each other by threatening to destroy what they love, if they don't, is something we should admire or something we should fear." "Both," I said. "Yes," he said. "Both." On Tuesday morning, I convened the City Council for an emergency session. I presented Dr. S's model. I presented the data from all active cities. I presented the pattern of consequences and the pattern of completions. And then I said the thing that I'd been turning over since Thursday morning, the thing that had kept me from sleeping. We need to decide, as a city, whether we're playing this game to avoid consequences or because the tasks are making us better. Because if it's the first thing, we'll break before the ace. And if it's the second thing, I need to know now. Because the things we'll have to do together are going to get much harder. Tasks 8 and 9 arrived on Tuesday and early Wednesday. I'll describe them briefly because the details have been widely reported, and because the important thing is not what they asked, but what they required. Task 8, 10 of spades. Every household on a designated street, Elm Avenue, 14 houses had to open its home to the household across the street for a shared meal before midnight. Every house, both sides. 14 families who mostly knew each other only as waving neighbors had to cook, invite, sit down, and eat together. The logistics alone were a nightmare. Dietary restrictions, family conflicts. One household was in active dispute with its neighbor over a fence line. 2 households didn't speak English as a primary language. One house was empty, The owners were on vacation in Florida. The vacation household's neighbors broke in. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. They broke a window, entered the house, set the table with the owner's dishes, and then called the owners on FaceTime and propped the phone up at the head of the table so they could attend. The owners, from a resort in Destin, participated via speakerphone for the entire meal. Every household participated. The fence dispute neighbors ended the evening by signing a handwritten agreement about the property line. I know because they brought me a copy the next morning. Task 9, Jack of Spades. Before noon Wednesday, the city had to produce a single handwritten document signed by at least 500 residents, stating one true thing about Grandview that no civic brochure or government website had ever said. 500 signatures in 12 hours. A true thing never publicly stated. Deborah organized it. She set up a table in the City Hall lobby at midnight and posted on the Facebook group. By 6 a.m., the line was out the door and around the block. The document they produced, I have a copy framed in my office, reads, "Grandview is a place where most people are lonely, and most people pretend they're not." And this week was the first time many of us stopped pretending. 512 signatures, completed at 11:17 a.m. I stood in the lobby and read it, and thought about the elm tree that had started all of this, the one that had fallen in the park. And I thought about how a tree's root system is connected underground in ways you can't see from the surface, and how sometimes you don't know what held a place together until it splits apart, and how sometimes splitting apart is what shows you the connections were there all along. 2 more tasks, Queen and King, or King and Ace. We didn't know the order. We knew only that the progression was tightening, that the tasks were no longer things individuals could perform, and that whatever came next would require something we hadn't built yet. Dr. S. called me Wednesday afternoon. "The Queen will be hard," he said. "The King will be harder. And the Ace," he paused, "the Ace will be the thing you think you can't give." I need to step back and tell you what was happening outside Grandview, because the story you probably heard on the news was not the story I was living. By Wednesday, 214 cities were active. The national conversation had become a war. Not a physical war, though there were incidents, which I'll address, but an ideological war over whether the game should be played. The federal position remained non-compliance. The president issued an executive order Tuesday night declaring participation in anomalous coercion events a potential federal offense. The language was careful, potential under review. But the message was clear. Good Americans don't play terrorist games. But the cities that had played were visibly, measurably different from the cities that hadn't. They had fewer 911 calls. They had higher rates of local business activity. They had neighborhoods that were talking to each other for the first time in years. They had stories real, specific, human stories of apologies given and accepted, meals shared, truth spoken. They had Ruth Becker and Devin Okafor and Patricia and Min and Carl Pruitt, and a signed document about loneliness that 500 people endorsed because it was true. The cities that had refused had rubble, a church bell in a basement, a mural turned to powder, an arch that had stood for millennia. And in each of those cities, a bitter, recursive argument. We should have played. We were right not to play. It's their fault. It's nobody's fault. It's the game's fault. The incidents I mentioned were concentrated in refusal cities, property damage, 2 arson attempts against city halls. A mayor in Macon received death threats, not from the game, from her own constituents, after the town's 1920s carousel was destroyed following a failed task. She resigned Thursday morning. In compliance cities, The incidents were different. 3 cases of people completing tasks, fraudulently fabricating apologies, staging confessions that weren't real. In each case, the game appeared to know. The consequence landed anyway. Whatever mechanism verified completion, it could distinguish genuine from performed. That detail is the one that still keeps me up at night, because it implies a level of observation and judgment that no technology I'm aware of can achieve. The compliance cities also experienced something I can only describe as civic euphoria. People were high on cooperation. The shared intensity, the countdown timers, the public acts of vulnerability, it produced a collective emotional state that was genuinely intoxicating. I felt it myself. Wednesday afternoon, walking through downtown Grandview, I felt a sense of connection to my city that I had never experienced in 14 years of public service. And I was afraid of that feeling. Because euphoria is not trust. Euphoria is a neurochemical event that makes you feel like you trust. But trust is built slowly and tested quietly and doesn't need an audience. The game was producing results that looked like community. I was no longer sure they were community. I was no longer sure the distinction mattered. Task 11. Queen of Spades, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Task 11. Before midnight, the city of Grandview must choose one resident to receive $250,000 from an account that will be made accessible upon completion. The choice must be made by public vote. The vote must be conducted in person, in a single location, with no absentee or electronic option. Every vote must be cast by a resident looking into the face of the person beside them. 4 hours, $250,000. One recipient, chosen by the community, face to face. Dr. S. called me within minutes. "This is it," he said. "This is the mechanism at its sharpest. Giving money to one person in a zero-sum allocation. This is designed to break everything the previous tasks built. Envy, resentment, self-interest. Every cooperative instinct they've developed gets tested against the most divisive force in human society." I requisitioned the high school gymnasium. There was no time for anything else. I announced the task on the Facebook group and asked the local volunteer fire department to handle crowd control. Gary, who had been against compliance since the beginning, came to me privately and said, "Martin, I'm not going to stop this. But I want you to understand that if this goes wrong, if someone gets hurt in that gym, that's on you and me. And no playing card is going to take responsibility." He was right. That was on me. People began arriving at 8:45. By 9:30, the gym was full. Not capacity full. Fire code was 1,200, but Grandview full. Over 2,000 people in a space built for half that. Standing room in the halls, people listening through open doors. The debate was supposed to be orderly. It was not. The first 40 minutes were chaos. People nominating friends, neighbors, themselves. Arguments about need versus merit. A man stood up and said he had medical debt that would bury his family. A woman said the elementary school needed a new roof. Someone suggested giving it to Ruth Becker. And Ruth stood up and said, "If you give me that money, I'll spend it all on sunflowers, and you'll have nothing to show for it. Give it to someone who needs it." At 10:15, a young man stood up in the back. I didn't recognize him. Later, I learned his name was Marcus Webb. 22, working 2 jobs, no family in town. He said, "I don't want the money. I don't think any one person should get it. I think we should vote to give it to the city emergency fund so it belongs to everyone." That's the answer. The game wants to see if we'll fight over it. Don't fight over it. The gym went quiet. Someone said, "Can we do that? The rules say one resident." I read the card again. One resident. Not one purpose, not one cause. One resident, Marcus said. Then vote for me. I'll sign it over to the city the same night. I watched 2,000 people look at each other. I watched them calculate. I watched them weigh whether to trust a stranger with $250,000 and a promise. They voted. Paper ballots, pen on index cards, looking at the person beside them as required. Marcus Webb received 81% of the vote. He signed the money over Thursday morning. The account was real. The transfer cleared. I slept for 3 hours Wednesday night. The first sleep in 4 days. I dreamed about the elm tree. In the dream, it was growing back. Not from the stump, from the sidewalk, through the cracks, in places trees aren't supposed to be. I woke up at 5 a.m. and drove to City Hall. 2 cards were waiting. Not on the library bulletin board. On my desk, inside my locked office. King of Spades, Ace of Spades. 2 tasks, simultaneously. For the first time, the game had broken its own pattern. The King's task read, Task 12. Before noon, the mayor of Grandview must publicly state, in his own words, the decision he has made during this week that he is least proud of, and why he made it anyway. The Ace's task read, Task 13. Before midnight Thursday, every active city must simultaneously broadcast, over any available medium, the document their residents produced in response to their confession task. Every city's truth, spoken aloud, at the same moment, by the person who organized the effort. There is no consequence for failure on this task. This task is optional. The game ends regardless. I read the Ace 3 times. No consequence for failure. Optional. The game ends regardless. After 13 tasks designed around escalating coercion and visible punishment, the final task had no teeth. It asked for something freely given or not given at all. It asked every city to share its private truth with every other city, voluntarily, simultaneously, for no reward and no penalty. Dr. S was wrong about the Ace. It wasn't the thing you think you can't give. It was the thing you don't have to give. I picked up the King card. My task, not the city's. Mine. The decision I was least proud of, I knew immediately. I'd known since Thursday morning. The decision I was least proud of was the first one. The decision to ignore the initial letter and let the tree fall. Not because I should have known the threat was real. Because I had Deborah buy the sunflower and then chosen not to place it. I had the remedy in hand and chose pride over a flower, and a 140-year-old tree paid for it. That was my confession. Public, specific, true. I drove to the park where the stump still sat, and I said it out loud to whoever was there, which was about 40 people who'd shown up because the word had spread. I need to describe how the final task unfolded, because it's the part most people got wrong. The Ace was delivered simultaneously to every active city, all 214. Same text, same framing. No consequence for failure. Optional. The game ends regardless. Most cities had produced their confession documents during earlier tasks. Grandview had its loneliness statement. Burlington had a letter about the bridge, not the one the game destroyed, but the metaphorical one between the old French-Canadian community and the newer refugee population. A bridge of mutual suspicion that both sides had maintained for years. Flagstaff had a statement about the Yavapai Arch that began, "We failed to protect what was never ours, and we are sorry, and sorry is not enough." The logistics of a simultaneous broadcast were significant. Time zones, available media, coordination across cities that had never communicated. The thread, now encompassing hundreds of officials, became the coordination channel. Someone suggested 9 p.m. Eastern. Someone else pointed out that West Coast cities would still be at work. They settled on 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. The FBI issued an advisory against participation. The executive order technically made it a potential federal offense. 3 governors publicly encouraged their cities to participate anyway. 2 governors publicly opposed it. The rest said nothing. At 9:45 p.m. Eastern, I stood in the City Hall parking lot with a handheld radio tuned to KCGV, our local AM station. Deborah was inside the station. She'd walked there because she wanted to read the document herself. She said she'd earned it. She had. At 10 p.m., Deborah read Grandview's statement. I stood in the parking lot and listened to it through the speaker of a radio that I'd brought from home. The same radio my father used to listen to Royals games. Grandview is a place where most people are lonely and most people pretend they're not. And this week was the first time many of us stopped pretending. Simultaneously, and I mean this literally, because the synchronization was later verified by broadcast engineers. 209 of the 214 cities broadcast their documents. Not all, not everyone. 5 cities declined. That was their right. The task was optional. The broadcasts lasted between 15 seconds and 4 minutes, depending on the length of the document. Most were under a minute. They were in English, Spanish, Hmong, Korean, Haitian Creole, and 11 other languages. They said things about racism and grief and economic collapse and addiction and neighborly silence and the particular kind of American loneliness that hides behind lawn maintenance and friendly waves. 209 cities told the truth about themselves at the same time, to no one in particular, for no reward. And then it was over. The game ended. No fanfare, no final card, no explanation, no envelope on Friday morning. The bulletin board at the Grandview Public Library stayed empty, and the absence of a card felt louder than any of the 13 that had come before. That was 5 months ago. I want to tell you what has happened since, because the aftermath is where the real argument lives. The physical consequences were permanent. Grandview's elm tree is gone. Burlington's bridge was rebuilt at a cost of $14 million. Flagstaff's arch is rubble. Macon's clock stands frozen at the moment it stopped, which the City Council voted to preserve as a memorial rather than repair. 18 cities lost irreplaceable structures. The total cost of consequences across all active cities has been estimated at $420 million. No person was physically injured by any consequence in any city. I want to repeat that. Across 214 cities, over 13 days, not a single consequence resulted in a human injury. Structures fell, windows shattered, stones crumbled, mechanisms stopped, and every time, the space was clear, the path was empty, the margin was preserved. The game destroyed things. It did not destroy people. The FBI investigation remains open. No perpetrator has been identified. No technology has been found. No mechanism for the card appearances or the structural consequences has been explained. The case file is classified, but I've been told by people who've read portions of it that the investigating agents themselves are divided between those who believe the events have a conventional explanation that hasn't been found yet, and those who believe they don't. The Rand game theorist, Dr. S., published a paper. It was rejected by 3 journals and then accepted by a 4th on the condition that he removed the word non-human from his conclusion. He agreed. His conclusion now reads, "The mechanism design displayed in the playing card events exhibits optimization characteristics that exceed known human capacity for large-scale behavioral engineering." He told me privately that the removed word was the only honest one in the sentence. I don't know who or what ran the game. I don't know if it will return. I don't know if it was a test, a lesson, a punishment, or a gift. I know that in Grandview, people who had lived on the same streets for decades without speaking now bring each other food when someone is sick. I know that the fence dispute neighbors on Elm Avenue take turns mowing each other's lawns. I know that Marcus Webb, who gave away $250,000, was hired by the city planning department and is the best young planner I've ever worked with. I know that Ruth Becker died in April. Heart attack. Sudden. She was singing in her church choir when it happened. Her funeral was the largest Grandview has seen in decades. And every person there knew her not as a retired postal carrier, but as the woman who stood in traffic and sang. Because someone had to. She was right. Someone always has to. That's not folklore. That's not a game. That's the thing the game was trying to show us. I've been asked in every interview, and there have been dozens, whether I think the game was justified. Whether coercion that produces good outcomes is still coercion. Whether the ends justified the means. Whether we should be grateful or furious. My answer has been the same every time, and it's not satisfying. And I don't care. The game was wrong. The coercion was real. The destruction of irreplaceable heritage, natural, cultural, architectural, was a moral crime regardless of the outcome. You don't get to destroy someone's sacred arch to teach them about loneliness. You don't get to shatter a tree to prove that people should talk to each other. The consequentialism doesn't hold. If a person did this to another person, we would call it abuse, regardless of how much the victim grew. And also, what happened in Grandview during those 7 days was real. The apologies were real. The meals were real. The signed document was real. The $250,000 donated by a 22-year-old kid with nothing was real. The look on Patricia's face in the parking lot was real. The sound of Ruth's voice carrying 3 blocks on a Thursday afternoon was real. Both of these things are true. The game was wrong, and the results were genuine. The mechanism was unforgivable, and the outcomes were beautiful. I hold both of these facts in my hands every day, and they do not resolve. And I have stopped trying to make them resolve. What I believe is this: we did not need the game. We had everything, every capacity for honesty, for vulnerability, for collective action, for shared truth before the first envelope arrived. We had it the whole time. The game didn't give us anything we didn't already have. It just made the cost of not using it visible. And that is the part that keeps me awake. Not the mystery, not the cards, not the impossible forensics or the structural failures or the funding from an untraceable account. What keeps me awake is the question of why we needed a threat to do what we should have done for free. I don't have an answer. I'm a man who approves drainage budgets and negotiates sidewalk easements. I'm the mayor of a town of 8,000 people who now talk to each other slightly more than they did in February. But I'll tell you this: the elm stump is still in the park. We didn't remove it. And last month, someone I don't know who planted a sunflower beside it. A single sunflower. Fresh cut stem pushed into the soil, which is not how you plant sunflowers, and everyone knows it won't last. It's still growing. One more thing. Last Tuesday, I arrived at City Hall at 7:40 a.m. Same as always. Deborah was at her desk. She was holding a plain white envelope. No postmark, no return address. I opened it. Inside was a single playing card, the 2 of hearts, and a sheet of white paper with 1 line of printed text. Thank you for playing. No tasks, no rules, no threats, just that. I sat down at my desk and I looked at that card for a long time. A 2. The lowest card. The beginning of a suit. Hearts, not spades. And a message that could mean anything: gratitude, dismissal, a promise, a warning, a bookmark for a page that might be turned again. I called Karen Whitfield. She'd received one too. 2 of diamonds. Same message. We called around. Every city that had completed all 13 tasks, every one of the 209 that had broadcast their document on the final night, had received a card. A low card. A new suit. A thank you. The 5 cities that had declined the optional final task received nothing. I asked Karen what she thought it meant. She said, "It means the first game was spades. Spades are work. The next suit is hearts. I think it means the next game, if there is one, won't use threats. I think it means we passed." Passed what? The part where you have to be forced. The next part is the part where you choose. I put the card in my desk drawer next to the framed loneliness document and the reimbursement receipt for Deborah's sunflower. 3 artifacts from the strangest week of my life. A card, a confession, and a flower. I don't know what's coming. None of us do. But for the first time since this started, I'm not afraid of the next envelope. I'm not afraid because 2,000 people in a high school gymnasium looked at each other's faces and chose to trust a stranger with everything. Whatever the next game is, I think we're ready. I think we've always been ready. We just didn't know it yet. This is Lost Signal Broadcast. Subscribe and turn on the bell for the next signal. Leave your report below. Until then, keep your radio close.